Candleless.
Happy Candleless.
Right? Because we come from almost Candlemas. I mean, it was like, what, 1 week ago?
Yeah, just a few days.
We might want to talk about this new segment in the podcast called Things Unsaid, which oftentimes we listen to ourselves.
I hate listening to myself, actually.
I do revision the episode as I listen, and then I think, oh, I should have said that, or I should have mentioned that. And you felt the same, right?
Yeah, several hours later, I am in bed that night, and I'm like, oh, why didn't I mention this? Like, I totally forgot that.
So we're going to make it related to each episode if there is things unsaid on that episode. So we're going to do Things Unsaid episode 2. And it's going to be very short, 15 to 20 minutes. And we're going to talk about things that we didn't mention in the episode. It's going to be a good addition to what we covered in the previous episode.
Yes, and we promise not to do Things Unsaid part 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for each one.
This is Appendix 1 only.
Exactly. So there still might be things unsaid.
Today, we're talking about the process of initiation and all of the things that pertain to initiation, including the approach to the Coven for requesting initiation and training. So, initiation, according to Cambridge Dictionary, it's a special ceremony or responsibility that signals the acceptance of somebody into a group. There's other definitions that touch a little bit more on the mystical, part of initiation, because this can be any initiation, right? A rite of passage, it's mentioned, making entrance or acceptance into a group or a society. Normally a group that it's not really all groups, but in terms of mystical, it would be a secret group or a secret society.
Yes, or a mystery cult, for example.
Mystery cult, yeah.
So
in the context of ritual magic and esotericism, an initiation is considered to be or to cause a fundamental process of change to begin within the person being initiated. What do you think about that? Did you experience that when you were initiated?
Yeah, actually, and if you don't mind, if I can go back to the definition of initiation. So I'll ask you, do you agree with that definition, even just out of the dictionary?
A special ceremony or responsibility that signals the acceptance of somebody into a group.
Yes.
Yes, I do agree. I think that it's an acceptance, somebody into a group, but it's more than this because, in our case, in our initiations, it is a special ceremony. So that's correct. Responsibility. I think there is a responsibility here because we are investing some role in the person. In this case, a role of initiate and also of priest or priestess, which is the office of the circle, as we talked about in the previous episode. And that signals the acceptance. It does signal the acceptance of the person into that particular group of people. And I think that that's true. But there's more to this, I think. Don't you think there's more to this?
I think
incomplete. Cambridge Dictionary, it's incomplete.
But I think there's more to this, especially when we look at it through the lens of what we do as a mystery cult. However, I agree with this definition in the sense of, the natural cycles of life are not initiations. So, for example, a child going through puberty and entering into sexual maturity, that's not an initiation. Having a child, birthing a child, that's not an initiation into motherhood. That's just the natural cycles of nature. And the definition is very clear that, it's a human ritualization of perhaps puberty, for example, where you have to do some type of a task for a rite of passage. Now that is an initiation. So I think I just wanted to make that really sort of clear. Otherwise, every first experience can be deemed an initiation. Like I tried kiwi for the first time. Now I'm initiated into the world of exotic fruits. Well, no, right? That's not really an initiation,
Right. Right.
right? So therefore, and I think it's important, right, too, as witches, that we all know that words have power. And I'm always worried about when we start to water down words, where anything can become an initiation, and therefore words can become somewhat meaningless. And I also like this too idea because it's a human thing. Humans do initiations. And as we said before, Freemasons, right? The OTO, right? Do initiations. And then what do you think too about, like, it takes a witch to make a witch?
It does, because you can't be initiated into something that you haven't got before.
Yes.
That you have, so, and there's this notion of, and I think it was Zorin Valiente who brought this up in one of her books, who initiated the first witch.
Yes.
And this brought about, and this, I think that we need to see people, just like I talked about covens, right? When you are accepted into a coven and accepted for initiation, you are entering that group in that specific time, and, you will receive a training that pertains to the evolution of that particular group work in that particular time. So when we talk about Doreen Valiente in this particular piece, when she says who initiated the first witch, clearly she was not working Gardnerian anymore. She kind of distantiated herself from those practices. She was more involved in traditional, actually, practices at the time, and she wrote this book in kind of light of that. It was a time when she thought there is no need for everyone to be initiated to become a witch. So, of course, she would not agree with that, I'm sure, when it would talk about Gardnerian witchcraft, but she always maintained that the person need to be initiated. But she was more, looking forward into another practice, and she kind of brought that in, which was a good thing, but also brought a lot of confusion. And this whole thing about, do you really need to be initiated to give an initiation? And if, which is very interesting if you think about it, right?
It is. And, and of course, we're speaking from the Alexandrian perspective, where initiation is necessary to become a witch in our tradition. And it's important to be, you're being validated, you're being witnessed, right, by a group of people, by peers, and that's what sort of like confers your membership. I think this is how systems work, human systems work. And when we talk about, because, there's also that argument of well, the gods initiated me, which is pretty egotistical to think about. But even in this, I'm not the first person to say this, where, even, Christ was initiated by Saint John the Baptist, right? In baptism, that Christ had to undergo, human laws and the human ways of doing things. I don't think you would be in any ancient mystery cult without a form of initiation by another individual that was initiated. That is how the power is passed.
What is interesting about this is that in Alexandrian witchcraft, you do need to be initiated to become a valid initiate of the tradition.
Yes.
Many people think that, because they have been practicing either solitary, or because they belong to another eclectic tradition that they received initiation into, they have the right. They don't need to be reinitiated to become a member of anything. They just have to voice their desire to be, and they will be automatically accepted. Well, that's not true. Because an initiation in any other thing, including OTO, including, Rosicrucian, including any other order or any other tradition, it isn't really the same as an initiation that it's actually of this in this context. This takes us into a very interesting point, which is dual lineage, and we talked about this in the second episode, and people that take two initiations in Gardnerian, in Alexandrian. We know historically, by talking with Maxine, and also, by reading things, that Alex didn't really initiate or reinitiated. Alex didn't reinitiated. Let me say this again. Alex didn't reinitiate Gardnerians.
Yes.
He understood that because the traditions are very, they're not very, they're coming, one comes from the other. He understood that doing a reinitiation would dilute the mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
And if the person got a first initiation from a Gardnerian coven, he would then accept them in the coven and retrain them.
Yes.
Giving them the Alexandrian training. And that's what they would do. That's historically what happened.
Yes, and I would not reinitiate a Gardnerian who went through a valid, initiation that could be vouched for, if they wanted to join my coven and become Alexandrian. That would not be necessary to go through the reinitiation process. And I agree completely. It would just be a training issue, right? In terms of how we then trained in our ways and our practices and beliefs.
But this brings another thing, which is kind of almost like a practice. I've seen this many times happening, which is I am just telling you over the phone what the differences are between Alexandrian and Gardnerian, and I'll give you the lineage, and that's that, right? So this happened many times, and I think that, if the person is going to get trained, that means in person, physically, right, in the temple, in training circle.
That's how I understand it. Yeah.
Right. Because there is this idea that the person just needs to know the differences between one and the other. We do it this way, and they do it this way. We do it this way, and that point, we do it this way, this point. Do you know what I mean? So there is a lot of this, which is, I think it's worrisome because, and then of course, all of this social media, which is an absolutely great thing, and I'm all for it. But there is this thing that comes about, which is the groups on Facebook and here and there that people exchange, knowledge, which I think that it's wonderful. But there are certain things that shouldn't be talked about. They should be shown to the person. They should be demonstrated to the person in the right conditions, which is training, right? But this is very difficult because, you have people that are talking to each other. There are third degrees, for instance, talking to third degrees. And of course, a third degree is not going to go and be trained by another third degree. That would be unheard of.
Imagine a third degree has to actually do more training. Imagine they imagine if they have to keep learning. Oh my gosh, perish the thought that you keep
and so this is the thing. I think as the third degree, and I know of the third degrees that went through a process of retraining, and and we just had to, I know a lot of people who went through this, and we go there and we say, I want to learn this, and I want to know how it's done. Can you show me? Sure, come, blah, 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 and I'll show you how. This is training. This is training. So so what happens in these forums more often than not is just verbal or written exchange of, so the training is basically dismissed, the practical training, and then the person just goes through a description of what is being done. And, this happened to me. This happened to me in a forum where I refused to explain to the person because I said, you need to get training and you need to come, and I'll show you how it's done, but you need to come. You need to come here. I can't really tell you what it is unless,
Yeah, I think this is why, one of the many reasons why I'm so disconnected from social media and I do not participate. I'm pretty appalled that this actually happens.
Right.
And I can't imagine, a third-degree Gardnerian and a third-degree Alexandrian are willing to exchange secrets.
There is this bigger mystery that I should reveal to you. Right now, you're all over the place, Michael. So you're in social media.
Unwillingly.
And I begin to see this happening when I had the Alexander Network. I begin to see this exchange in Facebook as well, in private groups and secret groups and things like that. We're losing the training. We're losing that beautiful thing, which is when we are all inside of a magic circle, to rapidly, fast exchange of information.
It certainly speaks to the 21st century where we want everything instantly. And you've mentioned this previously about, I'm like declaring myself a witch regardless of any training, or I just read a couple of books and now I'm a witch and you must call me, Lord Tannenbaum from now on. To this idea of the lack of not wanting to be trained. And this quick exchange of information, and now I'm an Alexandrian. So it's sad to see that many people don't want to take the time that it takes to develop these practices, and in so doing, becoming a competent witch, becoming a competent initiate. It's all fast and new now next.
So initiation process is often linked with death and rebirth, as well as a new beginning.
Can I ask you a question, Kerrigan?
Go ahead.
So why did you seek initiation?
I was always very conscious about this. I was always very conscious that I needed to be initiated into Wicca. Wicca, when I talk about Wicca, I'm not talking about eclectic Wicca, I'm talking about traditional Wicca.
Yes.
And I wanted it so much that I approached a couple of people about this. And I was in Portugal, in the middle of nowhere, with no means to travel. And of course, everybody told me, well, you need to come here. And I was so frustrated. There will be somebody listening to us right now that it's in the middle of nowhere, cannot have the means to travel, and they're talking about me. Yes, because I was that person as well.
Yeah.
It is very important for people to understand time and patience. Because the opportunity will come if your desire is to be initiated. So don't despair. I've been there. And it will come. I was very conscious about the need for initiation. I was very conscious about how to go about it. And I was very conscious about being initiated into the Alexandrian tradition, not Gardnerian, Alexandrian tradition.
Yeah.
And that for me was, I wanted that. I didn't want anything else. I wanted that. I went through, we talk about this in the introduction episode. I went through many other paths, but this one was the one that I wanted. And I contacted Janet Farrar at the time. I contacted also another high priestess in Germany, and both of them said the same. They said, all you need is to come and be initiated, and you need to travel. There's no other way of doing this. And I despaired at the time, but then I realized, okay, so you just need to put out that desire to be initiated, and you will come to.
And the importance of initiation for you, rather than just practicing on your own and culling information from books and cobbling together some type of craft. which is really kind of like my story. For many, many years, I was solitary, but you end up hitting a wall, right? You end up hitting a wall with your practice. At least I did. And then wanting more, wanting to join a witch cult. I wanted the validation as well that initiation offers, to be seen as a witch with other witches. And I also wanted to know the secrets, because you keep reading books about, well, this can't be revealed or this is not told. So I wanted the secrets. I really wanted the knowledge that initiation offers. And I really wanted to serve the gods and to serve the goddess. And I think we talked about this previously. I think initiation is part and parcel to vocation, that you have this calling to serve the gods, and that can't be quelled, that it doesn't go away until initiation. And then I heard too somewhere that vocation implies payment. We're not a paid priesthood. That's not true. You can have a vocation that's either paid or not paid. And again, this is just a little point about definitions. So then to follow what you would then ask, what happens with initiation?
I didn't have that. I knew that there were secrets.
Yeah.
I knew the history. I knew that it came originally from Gardner. I knew this history of this in terms of Alex and Maxine. I knew all of this before I even get into it, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want it. I knew there were secrets, but that was not something that moved me per se. I just wanted to be. My core spirit was into it. I wanted to be an initiated witch. That's what I wanted to be in Alexandrian witchcraft.
Yeah.
Both of the covens that I contacted were Alexandrian. At the time, I think that Janet wasn't really practicing Alexandrian. What is that you look for in somebody that comes to you and say, I want to be initiated in the Alexandrian tradition? Because we already established that. Yes, of course it is in your coven, but people are moved by, this is my experience, they're moved by the Alexandrian tradition. They said, oh, I wanted to be, very rarely you hear this, I wanted to be initiated in the Coven of Tumar. They say in the Alexandrian tradition. They don't say, in your coven.
Yeah. And then they come, of course, with a concept of what is the Alexandrian tradition. And to go back on your point, like, you did your due diligence, you did your research in terms of reading about Gardnerian, reading about Alexandrian, and then I'm sure there are tenets that you read about in Alexandrian, as well as those photographs that made you want to be an Alexandrian versus a Gardnerian or versus Blue Star or all these other traditions. So what I look for in a seeker, have they done their due diligence in researching the various traditions? Why are you seeking Alexandrian other than Gardnerian, other than Cabot tradition? Have they done some research? Have they done some soul searching? What resonates about the Alexandrian tradition with them? And I also look for vocation, and we use that term a lot. Is this a calling? And what I mean by that very specifically, and this is from my experience with seekers, there are some who are more actually interested in magic, and that's absolutely fine. One of the reasons too why I was very interested in witchcraft as a young teenager was because of magic, and I wanted to learn how to smote my enemies, right? With magical spells. So I totally understand that allure. And of course, witchcraft, we embrace magic, but I would not say that that is our first tenet. I am a priest of the goddess, and then out of that worship comes the magic. So when someone comes to me that's heavily inclined for magic, then I ask them, well, you can learn all different types of magical technologies and do spells, but that doesn't mean that you should become a priest. Do they want to be a priest? Do they really want to be in service to the gods first and foremost? And then magic comes along with that. So I look for research, that they know what they're looking for, that they've done some soul searching. And I also look for vocation. And I also look to see, is their life more or less in order? Do they have enough food? Do they have enough shelter, right? Are all those basics taken care of? Do they have a foundation upon which to work? Because when you enter into the craft, when you are initiated, when you start working a magical religion, it can shake you, right? It can certainly shake you to the core. So I look for seekers that have stability. Now, do we all have some instability in our life? Absolutely. I don't think any of us live perfectly stable existences, but that stability needs to be more rather than less. So that would be the things, probably the top 3 things I look for in a seeker. What about you, Harrigan?
Well, this reminds me, Maxine Sanders, when she talks about this, and this is what she says about this, and I think that it's worth mentioning. She says, when asked for initiation, we immediately suggest the seeker to look into and endeavors to meet as many groups as possible. My group does not accept everyone, nor is it the right group for everyone. There are corrupt groups, and the only warning we can give the seeker is to use good sense. If it doesn't feel right, it isn't. So she talks about this, and it's exactly what I do. So I immediately suggest them to look for other groups. But I want the seeker to do the seeking and go and see other groups because, our group might not be, just like Maxine said, not be right for everyone. We have an internet presence, so we have a site that actually says a lot about us. And so by reading that and maybe even talking with us, they will understand that. But I don't really look. So if they have all of that you're just mentioned, do you look at the person and say, this person can be my friend, so therefore is good for my coven? I would have this person in my home, and I have some connection in terms of social interaction with this person. What about if the person has all of those things that you have established and then really doesn't have a lot in common with you, but it does have promise of vocation?
So for me and the way that I run my coven, I do not need to be friends with my initiates. And it is not a requirement. Obviously, if I think the person is a criminal, then no, they will not be initiated. If I think they're going to steal things from my home, well, no. But they do not have to be my personality. They do not have to share my common interests. We can even go so far as, should politics be brought into covens, and what are your political affiliations? No, I'm looking for priesthood. And I am looking for those who are dedicated to the work and who are dedicated to the great work, working on themselves and getting them as close to the divine as possible. So no, we don't have to all share beers and talk about war stories before and after. And some groups absolutely run that way. One of my first coven was very much like that. Wanted family, wanted friends, wanted to be very, very social. Show up at the covenstead a couple hours before to shoot the breeze. Stay after a few hours more to talk. And I that wasn't me. That wasn't what I like to do. I like to go in, do the work, and then go. So no, that is not what I look for at all. What about you, Kerrigan?
I agree with you. When we put this out to receive requests for initiation and training in our coven, we are not putting it out to find friends.
Yep.
For that, I have maybe Facebook or other means. And I have a lot of friends. So there are my friends. They're not initiates. And, a coven is not a family, shouldn't be a family. A family is another thing. And of course, there's a sense of kinship that will develop within the coven, within that environment of the coven. And of course, it's understandable because if you consider all of the work that it's done by people And Maxine also talked about this. There are other things that contribute to that kinship. Working with a person, if the person is sick, or if the person, if they have some kind of illness that needs to be, the group will resolve that through sessions with them of healing. So there is a kinship that will be developed within the coven between the members. But that doesn't mean that I want them to be my friends. In fact, there are members of my previous covens that I have nothing in common with. Meaning, and this is great because then the conversations will rely on the magical, not on the mundane. So I'm not talking about the last series that you saw on Netflix. I'm not talking about the greatest restaurant that I went and we have to go. I'm not talking about those things. So that actually rules it out. And I'm talking about incense. I'm talking about magical work, inner work that we did or that we're going to do. And, that actually rules the mundane out, which is great.
We're not talking about, well, one of our coven members is ill, so we don't help that person. Well, of course we do. We can do magical workings. And without a doubt, sharing one's energy and worshiping together forms a bond and a kinship in the coven. But your point about here comes Sally to talk about whatever happened to her this week, that is the quickest way, I think, to just drag the energy down and to make our space mundane. So therefore, to always keep it on higher level, talking about magical practices, you always want to keep it to that elevated level rather than letting the mundane come in. That's a fantastic point.
I know there are people that will look for somebody that they can relate to the level of friendship, and that's wonderful for them. But what I look for is priesthood, because the person is asking to be initiated and to be part of the priesthood, not of my family, not of my friends group. They are coming to us because they want to be initiated into the craft. In this case, into the Alexandrian tradition of witchcraft. And if they are coming to us with that objective, I'm not going to look for in them anything else but the ability, the courage to be of the priesthood.
I'm not saying this derisively. There are many lonely people in this world and who are looking for social networks and for friendship. There are many people in this world looking for therapy, a shoulder to cry on. However, my coven and the priesthood is not there to function in that capacity. I worked many years in retail, and I would have customers who would just talk to you, forever, looking just because you're looking for human contact, strangers. And that is not what we're doing. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what you're doing. And this is really good for seekers to hear, because it might be off-putting when you or I, when we talk to a seeker, well, have you looked elsewhere? I encourage you to go and talk to other leaders. I encourage you to go and look at other traditions. And therefore, that seeker might feel like they've been sloughed off, which is not necessarily the case. We genuinely want you to make an informed choice. And with the craft, and you just mentioned this, everything has to be asked for. It's not rude for a seeker to go and look out at the other traditions and then knock on my door again. And then maybe knock on my door 3 times. And in many ways, that also speaks to their perseverance and to the vocation.
That is a very interesting point. The fact that in some instances, people have to ask for more than once.
Yeah.
People think that because they came in, and I have rejected people.
Yep, absolutely.
When you do reject them, you might say, well, maybe a year from now, or depending on the person and depending on what it is.
And they may never know the reason. We might reject them, and there's no rule that we have to say, I rejected you for this, and this.
And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you are opened to receive requests. But at that time, and because you're so involved in the group work and how the Coven is developing the work or certain specific work that it's being done by the Coven within that 6 months in all of the moons or something like that. At this particular time, it really isn't good for somebody to come in because the group is so focused in working this particular thing. So you might say, at this moment, we cannot do this, but please reach out in 6 months, or please reach out in a year or something like that. So sometimes it's really circumstantial. So sometimes it's the work that it's being done. It's the developing of some kind of technique or work in the coven.
Things that are happening behind the scenes that the seeker is just not aware of.
And here it is. We're explaining it.
What could be happening behind the scenes?
In your opinion, what is the best way for a seeker to approach you?
Them to contact me is probably going to be through email, initially. And then my expectation, so I have a website, and I'm on a couple of the different, search engines for Alexandrian covens in the United States or globally. And so that first point of contact would probably be through email. And then my expectation would be a rather formal letter that starts with a dear so-and-so, and then ends with a sincerely so-and-so, and not something that was a one sentence that says, tell me more about your coven, ?
That actually happened to me.
So that has happened to me as well. So that gets, I do respond usually, but that's now quickly becoming no response for me.
Right.
I think in that first letter, that first point of contact, you need to let that coven leader know that you have done some research, that you have read their website. If they do ask you, if you contact us, please answer the following questions, or, introduce yourself, please do as requested, because the initiatory path is one of hierarchies, and you will be told to do things. And the expectation is that you do those things. So I think writing a letter that takes that kind of thing in consideration will be a good thing in terms of whether or not you are fit for the Alexandrian tradition.
It is our job to test the neophyte trustworthiness, mental stability, physical stamina, and vocation. This is what we do in the assessment. You do a period of preparation before the initiation. Do you talk to the person, or do you just go to one physical meeting and then say, okay, you will be up to it on day blah and hour blah?
Some covens and some groups do an outer court, which is, I don't know, I don't have an outer court, so how would I explain it? In the sense of, it's almost like a study group where you can sort of test the waters with your seekers, maybe like a year and a day, where you give them exercises or whatnot, and you can see, how they perform, and is there perseverance. So I don't have an outer court, but I guess it depends case by case, but no, it would not probably go from an email to a meeting and then a week later you're initiated. No. There is going to be time, and I think patience is key. And I think seekers really need to understand that patience is key here. We have not forgotten you. We're building, we're seeing how this sort of plays out over weeks or whatnot. They might have an exercise to do. They might have I might suggest a book to read, and then meet again, and we'll talk about what they think about it, about what they just read. They might have a meditation to do, and then we can discuss that meditation. So there's a period before initiation will be formally asked by the initiate, and whether or not they will be initiated. What about you, Kerrigan?
I do the same. I do a period that varies in time. It could be very short, or it could be very long, but normally it's very short. If it is very long, it's because of circumstance, and probably the person is somewhere else and they can't really reach me, and they can't come as they wanted as fast as they wanted to for the initiation. So it really does depend, and it's very short, and it's a period of conversations, really, personal conversations. When I say personal, meaning not personal about personal stuff. It's just one-on-one with the person, and of course, books and maybe articles, maybe things that I ask them to do or to experience, maybe an exercise, maybe this or that, and then of course, those things will show if the person actually is a person that does that, and if they do that. It happened to me maybe 3 to 4 weeks. That was the fastest that actually happened.
Yeah.
And that's because there are people that come to you and you just know.
Yeah.
But then again, there's other things that we test, and there are things that we have to do, ceremonies that we have to perform to understand in terms of acceptance if this is a go or not. So there are things that we have to ponder upon.
Yes.
I'm sure that there are people who are capable of immediately say yes or no. It has to be a decision, and it is a big decision, not only for the coven or for us, but for the person.
Yes.
And sometimes we do reject people for their own safety. This is a path that is dangerous. One of the things that people don't talk about this. It is dangerous. And I want everyone to be very clear about this. It is dangerous because it will touch in places on you that you never imagined that you could be, moved or changed. So it is dangerous as well, because if you do not have the stamina, if you do not have the physical wholeness, if you don't have the mental stability, or even the vocation, this could be very tough and dangerous. So when people say, oh, the coven is and I've heard this, I don't remember what it was, but they talk about safe space. It isn't a safe space. It isn't, and it shouldn't be a safe space, because if it is a safe space, that breeds stagnation.
Yeah.
And you have to have your abilities and your capabilities on hand every time to deal with whatever it is that you have to deal, either personally as an initiate or in ritual and ceremony as a priest or a priestess. Then you will be actively developing your capabilities of being a good priest and a good priestess. So it isn't a safe space. It shouldn't be a safe space. It should be a space where sometimes you have to actually deal with things that are not safe. There is an amount of risk and there is an amount of danger. And whomever said to you that it is safe, it isn't safe. It's quite actually, I guess that it's misleading people saying that it is safe. It really isn't safe. So if you do have, and this is the thing, when I asked for initiation, I was totally conscious of this, that it was dangerous, that it was, I need to muster an amount of bravery to be capable of being in the circle. There are people that came to our coven and doing all of these things and invited to our temple or from other covens, and they comment on it being quite intense, because it is, and it's supposed to be intense. And some people, they're not capable. I'm sorry to say it, but it is the word, capable. They're not capable. They're not mentally stable enough. They're not physically fit enough, and they don't have vocation. How would you describe vocation so that people can understand what vocation is and what we're looking for?
So I think, like what I mentioned before, right, about vocation is, literally from the Latin, a calling, where they are called to the service of the gods. And this calling is so strong that there's no way around it. You must heed to that call. And I completely agree with you, Kerrigan, that it's not said enough that magic is dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think the 1990s and Llewellyn publications really sanitized all of this and made it sound that whatever you were doing is fine, and you can dip your toe into the occult, and working with spirits is going to be fun and easy with no ramifications. But that's not true. That's not true at all. And witchcraft, at its very essence, right, as a practice, is unsafe because you are tapping into and exploring these very potent energies. And I agree that our initiates must be ready to handle that. And even our most stable initiates, once they go through initiation, where you will be challenged in initiation, it does change you fundamentally. It's sort of a key that ends up unlocking lots of different doors that you had no idea, like you said before, that were inside of you, that connects you to a whole new stream of power, and can shake your foundations, right? Both good as well as bad. And in the circle, you must be prepared for situations that can arise within that space. No, it's not a safe space, and it's not a comfortable space either. So if you are 100% comfortable in your ritual practice, then you're probably not doing it correctly, because it's only through being uncomfortable do we grow and learn. And I think in the 21st century, we are living in a time period that everyone wants to be comfortable 100% of the time. Everyone wants to be safe 100% of the time. And everybody wants to be accepted in every single group 100% of the time. And the way that I look at it in my craft and my practice, that is just not the case.
When I speak about not being safe, I am talking about the spirit world. And of course, it's not the people.
No, not the people.
There's
I'm talking
nothing
about
to-
magic. I'm talking about the spirits world, spirit world.
Right. And the
Absolutely.
magic and itself, the activity itself, it's not a safe activity. Just
Yep.
like any other activity wouldn't be safe, right?
Yes.
Like people that work in the roads, in construction, in any other thing that would have an amount of risk. And this is what it is that I'm talking
Yes.
about. It's
Me
the
too.
activity that I'm talking about. And then the other thing is I need to define the first degree, second degree, and third degree. We have 3 degrees, and we're talking about degrees of initiation. 3 initiations. Often hear this as initiation, elevation, and raising, which is, I think, a very American way of talking about these things. I was taught that they were all initiations, and they are very well defined in Alexandrian tradition of witchcraft as the first is the initiation into the mysteries, the second degree is the penetration into the mysteries, and the third degree, it's the celebration of the other 2. And and this is one of the reasons why we give second and third degree together. It's because of this. It's because of the sequence of things. And I think that this is very important to mention to people. We do give second and third degree together. And Alex and Maxine historically always gave second and third degree together, except twice. And those were exceptions.
Yeah.
So when you have all of these initiates from all of both the first Coven in London and then Temple of the Mother, all of them have received second and third together. And then you'll have 2 people, 2 initiates or 3 in this case, that have not got the second and third degree together. They're the exception, not the rule.
Yes. And to speak on this, and I think from my perspective and from the perspective of our line, to make also the distinction that, first degree doesn't mean lesser and second and third does not mean greater. And what I mean by that is that my first degree initiates are full-fledged witches, in the sense that they are trained to do basically everything. And the only things that first degrees, I guess, could not do would be, to start their own coven and to initiate. And not many secrets are kept from first degrees in my practice. And so therefore, there's never any actually required need to become second and third. Do you understand what I mean? Like second and third doesn't have to be a goal. So from my understanding or my practice, second and third would be because you want to teach, because you want to lead your own coven. But there are certainly covens out there that don't let initiates copy the entire Book of Shadows, for example. There are covens out there, Alexandrian covens, that keep knowledge about, for example, the weapons secret until the second and third degrees. So maybe for them, that is why initiates would want to become second and third, is because now they get more information, which was just not the way that I do it. They're given pretty much everything. And then it's not the rule to not do second and third together. Those are our exceptions, but I think there are Alexandrian covens out there that do separate it. And, covens are autonomous and they can set up the practice as they want to. But I also think that's probably a very good question that seekers would want to ask coven leaders. Do you give second and third together? When do you not give second and third together? As a first degree, will I be able to copy the entirety of the Book of Shadows? Are there lots of secrets that are kept between first, second, and third? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think this is a great point to talk about. We are all, after the first initiation, priests and priestesses. That doesn't change with the second and third. We are also priests and priestesses.
Yes.
While we are third degrees. People forget that they think that because they receive second and third, they are now something else other than first. They're still a first degree. So I was taught that in the circle, the higher the degree, the more of a servant of the circle you become. So for me, it is important to have that notion because there's a whole lot of holier than thou in terms of, I'm a third. The first degree should be curious. The first degree should be eager to learn. Mm-hmm. When you turn to a first degree and say that's beyond your degree, you can only know that after your second and third.
Which happens
very frequently.
Yeah.
It is a form of control.
Yeah.
And there is very few things that we don't reveal to a first degree. Mm-hmm. And most of it, actually, all of them, is to preserve their experience of the initiation rite, and to preserve the knowledge that they will acquire when they go through the initiation rites of the second and the third degree. So it's really not to keep the information from them, it's to preserve their own experience, to have the opportunity to receive that when they are initiated into the second and third degree. It really bothers me when, and I've seen this happening in front of me, when third degrees are together and there is a first degree that comes in and then everything, you can't really be here. You can't be here. We're talking about this, or you can't be there. You're talking about this. I'm going to shock everyone right now. I have first degrees helping in second and third initiation rites.
That is shocking.
That's a shock because they need to learn. In the first degree, they're learning how to do everything. And including initiations.
Yeah.
Initiations of the first degree, initiations of the second and third degree, they can help in these initiations. So I'm sure that people will be shocked by now by knowing this, but this is what I do. The first degree needs to be able to understand and to experience everything as much as possible. A first degree, for us, for instance, is the first person that comes inside of the circle. It's not the third degrees.
Mm-hmm.
You see, because they need that time. They need more time inside than the third degree.
Yeah.
So they enter first the circle. And that's how it's done. So I think that there is not really a clear idea. We're all priests and priestesses of the gods. There's no difference between the first degree and the second and third, other than an initiation rite.
Yeah.
Between them, that it's actually not very secret. And just to tackle what you said before, the Book of Shadows is copied in its entirety in the first degree.
Mm-hmm.
There's no portions of the Book of Shadows that are not copied by the first degree right after their initiation. So there's a whole lot of things that I think, and we're probably tackle this into another episode, but there's a whole lot of things that the Alexandrian tradition, coming from the Gardnerian tradition, and based on the Gardnerian tradition, there were a lot of practices that were cast aside.
Yes.
From the Gardnerian tradition. They were cast aside because of the understanding that Alex and Maxine had about the craft, about control, about the opportunity to learn. And unfortunately, today, there are these cast-offs of the Gardnerian tradition are reintroduced into the tradition by some groups from the Gardnerian practice, which they were taken off by Alex and Maxine a long time ago, with the understanding of what they wanted to do and why they were taking them off. And I think these things about hierarchy and, looking at the second and third degree as, they're high priest and high priestess. For me, a high priest, the high in high priest, it's about the quality of work and what it's expected.
Mm-hmm.
And not because I'm higher than any first degree, I'm expected to perhaps perform better. I have first degrees that actually perform better than me.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Yeah.
I love it. So there's this idea that there's this divide that people continue to do. I'm sure that, there are Gardnerian covens that do not do this, but I know that this is very Gardnerian, has a very Gardnerian flavor to it, this divide between first degrees and second and thirds, because they are a high priest and high priestess. No, we're all priesthood, and we're all priests and priestesses.
Yeah, fantastic points, Kerrigan, which I totally agree with. And then when I think about high priest or high priestess, I'm actually thinking about a leader of a coven. So if I call myself I'm a high priest of such and such coven. Otherwise, I am a priest of the sacred circle of witchcraft. So that title only enters in for actually a really specific function as leadership.
Exactly. And that is why I do that as well. I am a initiated priest.
That's it.
And then high priest of the Coven of Tamar, which is my office in the coven.
Absolutely.
If you are just an initiate of the coven, then, and it's very interesting because if somebody in my coven, any member, we need to talk about this as well, which is third degrees that do not hive off. You don't have to hive off.
No. You
can continue in the coven and continue teaching in that particular coven. You don't have to form another coven if you don't want to. You can stay in the coven that you are, and continue your path, your evolution, as a teacher of that particular coven. You don't have to be the high priest of the coven, not all of the third degrees are high priests of that of covens.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they don't have coven.
Yeah.
They just stay. So there's a distinction. If you say that you're a high priest or a high priestess, I am assuming that you're referring to your office and you have a coven, and you're in front of that coven. You're the person that is teaching the coven, and you serve in that capacity of high priesthood into that coven, which is a teacher of that coven and a guide and a leader. If you're telling me that you're a priestess and a priest, I am assuming that you are initiated, and maybe you have a first degree, maybe you have a third. Who knows? But if you're telling me that you're a high priestess, I know that you're a third, and I know that you are serving that capacity in front of a coven. Do you see what I mean? So for me, that is the distinction as well. I avoid as much as I can to use the high priest. I always say that I'm a priest, and that's, unless I'm referring to the coven. And then I will say I'm the high priest of that coven. I never say that I am a high priest of the Alexandrian tradition, of which I have done it before, but I don't do it now because I understand this.
Yeah.
And people might disagree with me, and that's fine.
No, of course. No, but I know. And they will, and they absolutely will.
Oh, absolutely.
And no, but I do agree. And then to go back to just first degree initiation and that process, which certainly changes you. You are a changed person. And I think you had brought this up earlier, and I think I kept interrupting you, is that, initiation, there is sort of a death and rebirth, right? That happens in that process, that you are sort of transformed into a new person, or a new chapter has opened. And then I would also say, when you go through initiation, you are making a covenant or a pact with our gods that cannot be undone, right? So once a witch, always a witch. And I think that also speaks to when we talk about, the danger of doing a religious magical practice, is that you are making these pacts with divine beings, and you are making vows to them as well. Can I ask you a really controversial question?
Sure.
Same sex or opposite sex initiations. So in our tradition, we do opposite sex initiation. However, there are Alexandrians, call themselves Alexandrians, that do same-sex initiations. Is same-sex initiation, do you consider that to be a valid initiate in the Alexandrian tradition? What do you think about, what's the big deal about opposite versus same-sex initiations?
Well, I cannot talk to you about same-sex initiations because I haven't done any, nor I have been witness of any.
Nor have I.
So I don't know about that. I am very vocal about this, and people take this very strongly from me because I am a gay man, and of course, their expectation is for me to absolutely agree with same-sex initiation. And it's when they find out that it's the complete opposite, they oftentimes are shocked about it. But I will respond to this with another excerpt from Maxine's blog that I think that will illustrate this very, very well. The veering away from basic truths and practice central to the craft for the convenience of personal power and opinion occurs every so often. It always brings about the necessary backlash eventually. By working the basic rites and abiding by the simple and obvious rules that safeguard the practitioner, many, but not all witches, have been inspired to expand the rituals to suit the changing environment and state of consciousness of this time. The original book and oral tradition given during the initiate's training is a source of that inspiration. Alex and those who taught him were adamant that same-sex initiations within the craft circle was not witchcraft. It is a misuse of trust by those in a position of power. Alex knew this from personal experience and the subsequent repercussions. Alex did work magic with all male groups, raising power using male energy. He was the first to state that this was not witchcraft. He was a witch and a magician who knew the differences that exist in the diverse traditional circles of power. His constant advice/warning to the occult practitioner was, do not mix your drinks. What do you think about this?
I agree with this and what Maxine says. And absolutely, there are traditions available that are same sex, and you can raise that energy. There are traditions available that really don't take sex and gender into consideration. For example, I think the Cabot tradition, although I think they do have exercises where the individual has to explore the binary, meaning like the feminine side of you as well as the masculine side of you. And I think, right, this comes down to our, philosophical beliefs and our magical beliefs, as well as occult laws, in the sense of the importance of polarity, right? The importance of male and female. It's sort of a magical formula to produce fertile magic, and that we are worshiping a god and a goddess, and we're a fertility cult, and that is therefore reflected in the fact, right, that our members are male and female. I can go on about this, but do you want to? What do you think, Berrigan?
Well, I think, this is from Maxine's blog, and I think that this is really good because it illustrates exactly what I think. And of course, I received training and advice from Maxine, so this is what I think as well. And it's not what I think, it's what I experienced. And of course, people can say, well, I have experienced same-sex initiation, and I'm telling you that it's okay. Well, here's another excerpt. The craft is more popular than same-sex occult traditions. It is comparatively easy to set up a coven, usually with total sincerity, and then slowly, unconsciously develop the intention of attracting appreciation that feeds the ego.
Yeah.
Many lack concentration, tenacity, and vocation to persist with the inner workings of the craft. Their need to complicate, change, and intellectualize the purity of witchcraft rites appears to be an attempt to inflate their personal supposed importance, thus producing nonsense traditions. These innovations are mostly blinkered and many times introduced by self-aggrandizement-seeking students of Alexandrianism. More often than not, they are self-righteous and sanctimonious while hiding under the attitude of being ever so humble. It is a fact that some men who, because of their intimacy with Alex, assumed they are high priests of the craft. Oh, what an ego. I pity their poorly trained students who have gone on sincerely believing they have received correct training. The proof of the pudding is to be seen in their circles, and has been. So I think that when we have a practice of a tradition, and we have initiation rites that have alwast been done the same way, changing them, it's the only thing that I think, amongst all of the other things, that you shouldn't be doing. And same-sex initiation is changing the rite, because the rite is expected to be done this way, the way that was done always. And an initiation rite, it's a beginner rite. So when you begin, the initiation rite this way, we do not have actually experience to tell people, I don't. And of course, I would love to have this conversation with somebody that actually went through a same-sex initiation to see how that worked, how that worked and how it's working. Well, the thing is that we don't know who it is and who is not initiated same-sex, because normally people do not say it. They don't say it publicly. So I don't have somebody that said, well, I was initiated same sex, and I can tell you that it is okay, or it's not okay, or it's, whatever it is. So, or this, but I want to know, what is the enhancement of that in circle? How is that initiate what is the difference between them, actually? I know what the initiation rite is, and I know why the polarity verified and observed in these rites mean in terms of power and exchange of power. I know what that means, and I know how it is in practice and also in the inner work. What does that mean? How the power actually is flowing in that rite. I know it because I was trained in power. So I know how it works. But I would be very curious to know how it works within, other than being just simply an adjustment of convenience, an accommodation. So if it is an accommodation, then that's a different thing. I want to know how it works in terms of the occult. I want to know how this impacts not only the initiate, but also the work itself. And, if that's the thing, then I would be interested in knowing how that works. But I don't know if people know. I think that this is an accommodation that had no thought in terms of, maybe it has, and I'm totally
I'm
unaware.
Sure. I think
sure.
I think those who practice same-sex initiation would say it's absolutely valid, and that it takes that the initiation was successful. And again, I've never performed one. I've never been privy to one. I think it is important for seekers to know that within the Alexandrian tradition, that if you were initiated by someone traditionally of the opposite sex, that your initiation would be considered valid to every single other Alexandrian practicing on the planet, whether they do same-sex or opposite-sex initiations. But on the other side of the coin, if you were initiated by someone of the same sex, that not every Alexandrian would consider your initiation valid. So if you've ever left your coven and you moved elsewhere and you petitioned an Alexandrian coven in your new location, they asked you about your initiation, and it was same sex, there could be a problem there. And I certainly, however, with that being said, would never want to encourage those who received a same-sex initiation to hide it, or to lie about it and say that, oh, no, I received opposite-sex initiation. And I know there are many people out there that says, well, what happens in coven stays in coven. Yes, but that's really terrible to tell your initiates to hide something. And then I would ask, are you ashamed of the practices that you do, and therefore want to hide it? And I totally agree with you that there is a magical reason, right, why we do this. And I also think about opposite sex initiation, just sort of philosophically thinking about this. I most definitely consider myself to be a feminist. However, I think sort of second wave feminism back in the 1960s and 1970s really pushed too strongly the idea that, men and women are the same. And what do I mean by this? Of course, intellectually speaking, men and women are equal. There's no measurable difference. So therefore, women, of course, can be presidents of nations and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And I'm not speaking about that, but men and women are different. We are different biologically. We are different harmoniously in the way that we are raised in society. We are raised differently. We are treated differently in society. We navigate the world differently within our cultures and society. And this profoundly shapes you as a being. In my wildest imaginings, Kerrigan, I, as a male, and even as a gay male, will never, ever, ever know the female experience. So therefore, when you enter that circle and your initiate is the opposite sex of you, you are confronted with all of this, meaning like you must experience what is not you. And therefore, there should be this yearning to discover what is not you. Like you need to be confronted with the other. And I'm not the first person to say this either. Otherwise, it's just your reflected self, like your mirrored self. And therefore, what are you learning from that experience?
I think there is one thing that it's the only question that I have that is unanswered. Why? What is the reason? Oh, it's because that person had their partner and they worked together for many years and they wanted to be in the same rite of initiation. So therefore we give them, and they're both, one of them was already part of the coven. So I give them the opportunity for them to be initiating each other so that they can be comfortable with, whatever it is, the reason. But this is not a sustainable reason, according to my point of view, of changing a rite that has been done the same way for 40 plus years.
I think it has to do with ego, like what you were saying before. And I think it's really funny. And I think that covens who practice same-sex initiations couch this in this idea that they are more evolved than those who practice opposite sex initiations, that they have some type of deeper understanding of the mysteries that we lack. And I think it's really ego-driven and dismissive of the tradition and of the practice and of other covens. So therefore, we're looked at as the conservatives of the craft.
I love to be a conservative of the craft. I think I've heard this has came up the first time with me, actually, and with the person that did it first time, as far as I'm concerned and as far as I know, but in a line that was coming from my original line, which is the Bene Gesserit, and at the time was a big thing. And I told them exactly these words: that's not witchcraft. Mm-hmm. And they were absolutely shocked. Physically, actually, they did the same as if I say to somebody that I'm a witch in Portugal. They physically jump back. They jumped back when I said, this is not witchcraft. And they were like, what? Do you really think so? And I said, yes, I do. And apparently my teacher seems to feel the same. And apparently Alex also knew the same. There's a lot of stories about people being initiated in several circumstances. Very strangely, you said they seem to be posing as more evolved. And there's this banner, the craft has to evolve. And everything that it is following, maybe the tradition, because this historically was always done. We've never you heard about Alexandrians doing this other than, I don't know, the years 2000s. You've never heard it. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but we'd never heard about it. That's right. So this came up in the 2000s, so after 2008, and has been done, and we know that has been done. And although we try to give our opinion and say, this is really not traditional, aren't you worried? Oh, no, because people, when they go through same-sex initiation, we actually warned them that they might not be accepted by everybody, but they wanted to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So why are you changing this? This is because you feel better? Is it an accommodation? Is it because you feel that you know better than anybody else? Is it because you think that this is an evolution out of the... It comes up to the same thing, which is, why don't you let the tradition change you instead of you changing the basic? I mean, this is basic.
Yes.
This initiation rite cannot be
And you're not,
more basic
that's,
than...
you're here not to change the tradition. You're here to let the tradition shape you. Absolutely. And you
In
bring
the
up,
experience of it, right? In the experience of the tradition, you let the tradition change you.
which may be
And
very uncomfortable, right? But
right.
that is part of it. The being uncomfortable is part of that process and that growth. And you talk about accommodations, which certainly leads into initiation. So what about, we talk a lot, again, about safe spaces. And what if you did have a seeker or someone who's about to be initiated, but they had certain triggers and traumas that you think might be activated during the initiation process? Would you tell that soon-to-be initiate what the process will be to warn them? Meaning, are you asking for their consent? Would you still initiate them?
Let me tell you one thing that it's very important to know as well. That happened actually within the Alexandrian craft, where somebody... You don't ask those questions. I mean, who would ask that in the 80s? Nobody would ask that.
Nobody.
Oh, are you traumatized? Do you think that this and this would trigger you? Do you have any childhood traumas? But then again, I've learned this more and more often, that you have now to include questions that you would never think about asking anyone, because these things do happen. And because of what we have experienced before, when initiates actually go and sue in the courts and everything. They sue people because they triggered this and this, and I didn't know that would happen in an initiation, and nobody told me. And now I am sued because that person was triggered because her father, blah, 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 or her mother, blah, blah, blah. Now we have to ask these questions. By the way, this didn't happen to me, but, but I've heard it firsthand, and this is horrendous.
Yeah, and we have taken a vow. So what can you, without breaking your oath, would you ever tell a non-initiate the initiation process?
Well, I always ask them, do you bleed a lot?
What is your threshold for pain on a scale of 1 to 10?
That's right. I'm sure there are other groups that disagree with me, or any other people that disagree with me. There are also priests and priestesses of the Alexandrian tradition. They want to tell you that everything will be okay. Don't worry. We will make accommodations. If you can't go on your knees, and we'll just put a pillow in there. That's great. Wonderful for you. And, we'll help you up or whatever. That's great, but I want you to understand that what I've learned from my teachers is that you need to have this in order for you to be part of this. And this is what I teach. Evolution is not really actually discarding things and putting in others that are easier for people that ask initiation. It's not supposed to be easy, and it's not supposed to be politically correct or accommodated to your own needs. If you're coming in, I mean, you can talk about this, Michael. You can talk about the initiation rites of, many mysteries of the ancient cultures in classic history. It wasn't this way, If initiation into the mysteries of Egypt, in Rome, Greece, whatever it is, some people would die in these mysteries of the temples of old. There are actually reports of this, that not all of them would make it. All of these mysteries, all of these schools, all of these temples, all of these things, they were difficult. Some of the initiations were actually, the initiate would not survive.
Yeah,
you
and I think
know.
this is, and again, I think these are great points, and this is all being raised for the seeker. These are things that seekers need to ask when they're seeking initiation. They need to ask coven leaders. If you have a deathly fear of the dark, is this going to impact you being initiated? And I don't mean to make light of it, but it's true. Or something more serious, that you are in recovery and you can't have alcohol. Well, does that coven insist on wine, or will they make an accommodation for you? So those are things that do need to be addressed when a seeker is speaking with coven leadership.
I once was in a coven as a guest, and chalices were passed. I was maybe practicing the craft for, I don't know, 8 years or something. And a chalice passed by. And of course, if the chalice is passed, you take a sip. And I had a shock reaction to the point that the chalice flew away from my hand.
No.
Because it was water.
No. That's very
Yeah.
Cabot. It's very Cabot tradition, water.
It was physical. It was a physical reaction because, I guess that people are recovering from things, and then people want to include everyone. So this is the reason why I find it very, very interesting. And people might say, are you going to not accept somebody that has a problem with alcohol because they're recovering alcoholics and you can't really have wine? Well, there are accommodations that you can make, but they're very rare and depends. But the thing is that I had that reaction. It happened to me.
I think this all comes from a very good place, right? This all comes from a very good place where people do want to be inclusive and accommodating. But I would
Right.
put that caveat that we are not inclusive. We're no more inclusive than Harvard University accepting every applicant. So
right.
There are standards, there are criteria, there are magical reasons why we do the things that we do that have been tried and tested for the last 50 years in terms of our tradition or thereabouts, or millennia in things that we are tapping into from ancient sources and ancient cultures. And wine is very important to our rituals as well. And this leads me to another question, because I hear this too, where, for initiates, would you, for example, initiate an atheist?
What?
I've heard this of witches, working with people that have different beliefs or non-beliefs, and that's fine. That we're not dogmatic in the sense that we do not tell initiates what to and what not to believe. So therefore, you can be an atheist in a witch's circle. So if someone came to you, a seeker, and then said, I'm an atheist, however, I want to be an Alexandrian witch. Is that an oxymoron?
I don't know what that means. Meaning, I know what it means. I know what an atheist is, but I don't know what that means in terms of an atheist coming in and say, I want to be initiated Alexandrian.
Or an agnostic who's like, well, I don't, believe in, but I also don't not believe that there's the divine.
Well, an atheist, okay, so let's look at the atheist. So what does it mean, an atheist? What is it, the definition of atheist?
Right. Atheo, so therefore against theology, against God. So does not believe in a divine.
So it doesn't have meaning doesn't have a God, or,
Yeah, right. No belief.
Right. But does it believe in the whole? Maybe not, because it's
Maybe
atheist. So it doesn't believe in the existence, right? Of
in the
any
existence of God, yeah.
Of God or any divinity. I think that's a round no, right? Because we are very clearly a fertility cult that is based on the rites of worshiping of the goddess of the moon. And of course, the existence of deity is pre-established, right up front. So I wouldn't say no, thank you very much. I think that you're I don't even know why you're here, I would say.
Well, I think they come to learn magical technologies. Do you understand what I mean? Like they're coming to learn about magic and how to how to do magic. So I think this is like circles that are really talking about praxis, that whole
Oh, I
like
see.
orthopraxy. So therefore, if I just
Mm.
go through the motions, then the magic
But
works.
you don't need an Alexandrian coven to do that.
No, you don't. And I would
Right.
have I would hope, my initiates must, I'm so sorry, but you must believe in a god and a goddess. Otherwise, and you must believe in our god and goddess.
Well, my question would be, why do you want to be an Alexandrian?
Exactly.
Well, especially because we have worshiping circles. So it's really very difficult to imagine somebody that's an atheist being in a worshiping circle with us.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that, but no, I wouldn't initiate them. No. No, I wouldn't do it. But there's a lot of very interesting things that people do in these things. For instance, there is a story that it's very interesting that somebody that was Maxine that told me this story, that they had a Catholic priest coming in the coven and being initiated, which is really very shocking if you think about it. Why would a Catholic priest, which is a religious institution, hundreds of years of history, why would he come in to be initiated into a witchcraft tradition? And the answer is because he was conscious that there was a lacking in his own religion of the feminine.
Yeah.
The other side of the feminine was depleted of any meaning, of any substantial meaning, religious meaning, in terms of the Marian cult was not really sufficient to embrace the fertility piece of the feminine, which is a whole picture. It's not the same. But he would come, and he would not come to all of the circles. He would come once in a while, and it gave him probably, and this is my interpretation of it, this is not part of the story, but I would imagine that he would be so much richer in terms of what he brought into his congregation, in terms of what the divine was.
Mm-hmm.
So when he talked about God to his parishioners, I'm sure it was the words that came out and how they came out because of his experience within the witchcraft circles and the goddess. It was much more richer and meaningful. Mm-hmm. And his parish grew a lot after his initiation because of this consciousness, because of how he spoke on the pulpit, how he addressed people in that church. So it changed people. And so I heard a lot of stories about interesting things that actually happened that are not really conventional. But these make sense. They have an explanation. They do have, we can understand, we can see it, as shocking as it is. We can actually see some interesting development here in terms of his own consciousness of the divine.
At least he believes in God. He's halfway there. And it really does speak to this idea of, like, in Catholicism and this all male priesthood, that there's something missing, right? There is something missing to that. It's infertile. And I don't mean fertility in the sense of making babies. It's infertile magic. And you need that divine feminine, right, to make something happen.
Right.
And that is why, right, in our circles, if only the priests show up for circle and there's no priestesses that could make it that night, we don't circle. We need that balance, right, of men and women to make it happen.